So with graphics card prices being completely out of whack still, I figured it's a good time as any to do a little bit of experimentation. So today we're taking a look at Vesuvius versus Vega. That's right, the classic R9 295X2 that features two Hawaii full-fledged cores running at 1118 megahertz. Wait, 1018 megahertz. Clock speeds weren't quite as high back then as they are these days, but it did feature 8 gigabytes of GDDR5 running at 5000 megahertz. Wait, scratch that. There's 8 gigs on board, 4 gigabytes per GPU usable. Haven't really seen the DX12 dream come to fruition where it can combine both sides and have 8 gigs of RAM. But this is the 295X2. It's a behemoth of a card. We've taken looks at it in the past, brought it back out for various tests and will it do and how does it do now kind of things. But what we wanted to look at specifically here is, well, how the 295X2 stacks up against the RX Vega 64 liquid cooled edition. So two reference liquid cooled cards. Now we do know in the past that Fiji didn't really quite stand up to Vesuvius very well. In fact, it was really not anywhere close. So does the clock speeds and the memory capacity and memory speeds and all of the improvements in RX Vega bring it closer to the performance of the R9 295X2? And that's what we're looking at today across the course of 4 games and 1 synthetic. So nothing crazy here. This isn't going to be a really long drawn out video. We're just going to have a little fun here. Before we get started, I just want to mention that the test bench that we're using is our X370 test bench running the Ryzen 7 1700 at 3.9 gigahertz with 16 gigs of DDR4 3200. With that out of the way, let's jump into these benchmarks. Up first on the dock is Firestrike Extreme, and we're going to look specifically at the graphics score. So everything's at 1440p today, and what we see here is that with great scaling and all of these different improvements, we see that the graphics score pegs at, well, roughly about the same. The Vega 64 has 11,452 and the 295X2 has 11,334. So in synthetics already we've got a great start, but let's see how this translates into actual games. Starting off at first with Wildlands, Ghost Recon Wildlands at 1440p high preset show a considerable lead for the Vega 64 liquid cooled. That's thanks to not having to contend with poor GPU scaling. Now, Wildlands does utilize multi-GPU fairly well. The game was playable, but the Vega 64 was considerably better. What about a game like Grand Theft Auto 5 that has absolutely great scaling when it comes to at least 2 GPUs? I don't have more than 2 of the same kind to test past that. But we see that the 295X2 lends itself considerably faster on paper to than the Vega 64, but I'm going to throw this image up here. This is what the frame times look like on a graph. It looks like somebody went across it with pretty wide brush strokes. So the fluctuation of the graphics is pretty extreme, or the frame rate is pretty extreme consistently. Part of that could be due to the inconsistent core clocks across the 2 GPUs, since one of them does throttle because of the heat. So interesting to see that there. What about, now we're gonna give another best case scenario for the 295X2, which is Deus Ex Mankind Divided at 1440p with DX12 and the high preset. We see it as far as average FPS and the 1% lows considerably faster than the Vega 64 liquid cooled. But that game does have some of the best multi-GPU scaling, especially in DirectX 12, of most any game except for maybe Sniper Elite 4. But it's really neat to see that happen there. But what about we go into another game where multi-GPU is not exactly the greatest on the title, which is Battlefield 1 running at DX11 at 1440p Ultra. We see the Vega 64 liquid cooled considerably faster all around than the R9 295X2. So has Vega caught up to Vesuvius? Well, yes and no. I mean, it's hit or miss. So it's interesting to see that what was once a $1,500 graphics card is still pretty relevant today, especially compared to modern high-end GPUs. Of course, you still have to contend with the heat, the power draw. It's not a perfect card, but it's a really neat card to still see kicking pretty strong. Unfortunately, we don't have something like a Titan Z to see how that's held up. So those are still pretty expensive if you can even find them. So this has been Keith with WCCF Tech TV. Again, remember, this wasn't a review. This was just, well, let's see how things unfold. We got a few more of these lined up in the future, so hopefully you'll find them as interesting as I do and as fun to watch as I had to make it. So this has been Keith with WCCF Tech TV, and we'll catch you all in the next video.